Hello and welcome to the Car Care channel, and welcome to the best and worst Toyota engines. In between all the Toyota engines, and most of them will actually get mentioned in this video, there's good ones, there's bad ones, there's honorable mentions, there's ones that are kind of on the downtrend as time passes, and then there's the Hall of Fame. Let's get started with a video with the best Toyota engines ever made right after this. Before we start the best engines, I want to say one thing. I am not surveying 300,000 people that own the cars and all that. I'm sharing this from my experience as a Toyota technician for a very long time and now owning my shop specializing in Toyota and Lexus. Let's start with the best engine. These are the engines we do the least amount of actual internal repair to. And they're not in a particular order, but this one engine, it is number one in my book. The UZ series engine. The 1UZ, the 2UZ, the 3UZ. The 1UZ being the 4.0, which started Lexus in the LS400, and then the later model of that in the LS400 second generation. And then the 2UZ FE, the one in the Land Cruiser 100 series, in many other Toyota models, Sequoia, Tundra, and others. And then the 3UZ in my beloved LS430. Folks, these engines are just out of this planet good. Let's put it this way. They are near perfect. They are so well made and so well engineered, and just a combination of two things that you rarely see. You'll have a really good engineered engine, horrible execution in the production, cheap parts and whatnot, or you'll have engines that if you slightly neglect them, they'll have all kinds of issues. This engine, even if you neglect it, it'll just keep going and going. Only thing that goes against it, it is a timing belt engine. It is interference. You break that timing belt, all this glory is gone. That's the only thing about it, but it's definitely one of the top engines. The second one is the 3MZ FE. Folks, this engine, even with neglect, it'll just keep going and going. It is another timing belt engine. Yes, the VVTi model is interference, but it is such a good engine. A lot of oil leaks and coolant leaks and whatnot, but the engine itself, mechanical internal, you rarely go inside one unless you severely overheat it or really just push it to the limit, and with high miles, things will go. But otherwise, these engines are really good. And then the next engine is the 2JZ GE. I mean, we cannot talk about best engines without mentioning the 2JZ, but I'm specifically talking about the GE engine. Folks, it doesn't make the most power. We're not talking about it from a performance standpoint, but from a reliability. These engines are tough, and they have very little issues with age, oil leaks and whatnot, another timing belt engine. But I wish Toyota used that engine in more models in the US. Elsewhere in the world they did, but in the US it only came in the Supra and then later the VVTi model. VVTi model is very good, but the early one was even better in my opinion. Now the next engine is an unsung hero. A hero that usually gets glanced over, nobody really talks about it. The 1NZ FE, found in the Toyota Yaris, the non-hybrid iteration, like not the Prius and whatnot, the Yaris one. This engine, I know so little about it because they just never break down. I mean, you'll push this engine with neglect past 300,000 miles like nothing has happened. It's such a good little engine. It makes decent power for its intended use, but it's definitely one of the top engines here, folks. And the next one is the 5VZ FE. This engine started out life, this engine series, the VZ, was such a horrible reputation, but the 5VZ took things to the next level. It's a beautiful engineer engine, super well made, and they last such a long time. I mean, in the life of this engine, it has this very long life of the engine. You may do a head gasket, most likely not if you take care of it. They last a very long time. They have tons of oil leaks and little stuff here and there, but most of them have to do with age. I mean, don't get upset if your 20-year-old engine with 300,000 miles develops a valve cover gasket leak. You fix it, we're back in business, and just the miles keeps rolling on this engine. It's beautiful engine to work on, to own, to drive, the way it sounds, just everything about it is wonderful. And the last one, and you're noticing all of these are kind of older engines, there's one shining star from the newer stuff. The 1GRFE, the updated one, the one in the 5th generation 4Runner, and equally in the FJ Cruiser 2010 to 14. Folks, this 1GR, it doesn't feel like a modern engine. very few examples have been torn apart and kind of worked on because they don't have many issues. You take care of them, they just go and go and go. And yes, they have oil leaks here and there when they get a lot older and a lot more miles, but internally, unless you severely neglect the 1GR, it's just going to keep going and going, and it's just a beautiful engine in my opinion. Let's talk about some honorable mentions. And the reason they are honorable mentions is they do have a few problems that can turn disastrous, but overall they're really good engines, starting with the 2GR FE. My beloved 2GR FE. I love this engine, and I think it's a great engine, but there are a few things that could turn this great experience into a very bad one. Namely, its lovely tendency to leak oil and needing you to tear the entire car apart to fix the oil leak. And the other thing is, early iterations had VVTi issues, rattle and cold start, whatnot, but the later iterations got much better, and it's a very good engine if you take care of it. But the key emphasis here, if you take care of it. You don't, we're gonna have issues. The next engine is an engine that is really dear to my heart, but unfortunately we had to not put it in the best, we have to put it in the honorable mentions, the 5S FE. The 5S FE is such a great little engine. It doesn't make tons of power, but it's super smooth, reliable, keeps going and going, but they do have a tendency of, if you don't drive them high miles, of pulling the rod caps off because they get loose and they just fall off, and we have all kinds of problems. It basically destroys the whole engine. That's the only reason this engine actually got off the best engine list into the honorable mention. It's a great engine. If you pull that pan down and tighten these bolts for the rod, from the nuts for the rod caps, then we're good and we don't have any issues. And the next one in the honorable mentions is the 2ZR FE. Great little engine. However, they do have VVTi problems, oil leaks, and with bad oil change history, they love to start burning oil. But they are still a really good engine if you take care of it. The early iterations, like 2009, 2010 Corolla, did have VVTi, rattle and cold start, and all that jazz. Oil leaks a little bit earlier than usual, but nonetheless, if you take care of that engine, it's actually a very good engine. The next one is a little bit of an oldie and a sweetheart. The 22RE, folks, this is a really good engine, but it does have a couple things. They do like to go through head gaskets, but again, we're talking about a much older engine here. But the second thing is they have a tendency of wearing chain guides, and then all of a sudden the chain starts eating into the front cover. That was one thing I was a little bit got it off the best engine list. Definitely not the best. You can't compare it with like some of the best, like the UZ series and whatnot, but the 22RE is a really good engine with a few quirks here and there. And the next one is kind of one that almost didn't make the list. The UR series engine, the 1UR, the 3UR. Folks, I own a car, I own a GX460 with the 1UR. They're great engines, very reliable. But their only problem is when things do happen, and they do have a few coolant leaks, oil leaks that tend to happen through their life, they're very expensive to fix because of the models they're in. Very big engine in a very tight space, and labor costs are very high, and that's the only reason this engine is off the best list in the honorable mention here. And the last one here is kind of getting into the much newer stuff, the dynamic force engines, except the V35A and the T24A. So your A25, your M20, really good engines. They're honorable mentions because we don't have a long track history. In the M20, there are kind of a data of a common trend with them dropping the thrust washer, so that's why they're not in the best. But the V35 and the T24A, too early to tell, but the V35 does have a few issues with turbos, with contamination from the factory and whatnot, so we're going to keep them out of this list altogether until more data is available and we see more examples of them. Let's talk about the worst Toyota engines. And before we start, small disclaimer. If you own one of these engines, these are just facts from the ground, folks. Don't get offended. If you have a good experience with some of these engines, I am really happy because I wish nobody harm. But if you're going to buy one, be careful. Avoid if you're not informed and you don't know what you're getting yourself into. Starting with The one that is a mistake from Lexus, flat out. 4GR FSE. The GR part of that engine itself, the engine itself, the mechanicals and everything, it's a great engine. It's a GR series engine. We just talked about two of them, one of them in the best, one of them in the honorable mentions. But that particular engine was an experiment that went really south. Direct injected engine only, that is old school, half baked, half done, and you'll find it primarily in certain years of the IS250. Avoid. I mean, you will never have a good year with that engine. Let's put it this way. Some of you will, and they will comment down below very angrily, and that's okay. But if you're buying one out there, avoid. It's not a good engine to have, folks. The next one in the worst Toyota engine list is one that actually breaks my heart, because it is a very good engine until they ruined it, but there is a fix for it. So let's talk about it. The 2AZ FE, specifically from 2007 all the way to 2015. Folks, this engine before 2007 was a great engine. It was one of the greats, absolute greats. Very reliable, very simple engineering. The thing works for a long, long time if you maintain it well. But then come 2007, they put low tension rings and everything goes downhill. In its defense, they did issue a campaign, a limited time campaign, where they changed the design of the pistons and rings so it would stop burning oil. And that's the principal problem. No matter what you do to a 2AZ from 2007 to 15, they will eventually start burning oil very badly. Folks, if you're buying one of these engines, be very careful. If the campaign has been done and you know that this engine has updated pistons and rings, we're good. Otherwise, you're looking at a full rebuild or an otherwise perfectly healthy engine. That's the reality. And some of these rebuilds are expensive, and if you get it to a severe point, things get really expensive if you have to put a short block. And that's reality of the 2AZ. It breaks my heart, because if you have one that has had the update done to it, the pistons are updated, rings are updated, otherwise it's just a bulletproof engine. Nothing else goes wrong with these. That's how sad the reality of this one is. And the next one is, I am not sad at all. It is, my back still remembers those days. The 3VZ FE. The 5VZ is one of the top engines. The 3VZ, not even close. I mean, this engine started out life as an okay underpowered engine. That's fine. But then head gasket problems, and they did a recall and a campaign, and still head gasket problems. And it's such an overcomplicated, underachieving engine that when you put it next to the 5VZ, it's like, what were they thinking when they came out with the 3VZ? Be very careful with 3VZ cars, because you will be doing a lot of head gaskets, and you will be dealing a lot of vacuum leaks, and this and that. And it's like, why do you get yourself into this hurdle? Why don't you just get a 5VZ? 100 times better. That's just my humble opinion. The next one also breaks my heart, because it actually comes in a car that I love, the 7M series engine. Folks, the 7M, it had a great start, but the execution was terrible. And we have the 7M to thank for the birth of the JZ series engines. The 7M, in its non-turbo model, is okay, just barely okay. In the turbo model, things went really bad. I mean, head gasket problems, and when you figure those out, oiling problems and oil pressure problems, and when you figure these out, it is so underpowered as a turbo engine and a fragile little turbo on it, and it just, as soon as you're done fixing these three, the head gasket goes again, and the cycle repeats. Short of taking the 7M and replacing half of its original components to upgrade its stuff, you'll never get a reliable 7M. That's how they are. They're too old, but we had to mention them, and I have to be non-biased. I love the Mark III Super, and you guys know that. That's the engine in the Mark III Super, in the US model at least. Now, this list of engines are engines that are very good, but they're starting to trend down with kind of newly coming common problems, and most of them have to do with neglect, honestly, but there are showing signs of problems a little too early for neglected engines, typically from Toyota. The first one is the 1AR and 2AR series engines. Folks, these engines are great if you take care of them, and these engines unfortunately fell the victim of the 10,000 mile oil change interval, and they love to burn oil. I mean, it gets so bad with these that they just fall apart completely because people continue with their 10,000 mile oil change interval, and it just destroys this otherwise very reliable engine. Folks, if you own an AR series engine, please change your oil 5,000 miles, even earlier if possible. If you want to play it on the safe side, you want to keep your AR ticking away for a very long time. The next one is the 1MZ FE. Folks, the 1MZ is a great engine, but they did have more of a tendency to develop sludge. Most of it have to do with neglect, but typically Toyota engines, the good ones, even when you neglect them, you just keep going. Not the 1MZ FE though. It's a great engine if you take care of it, but be careful with examples that are neglected because they love to develop sludge. It gets so bad, it just destroys the whole thing. The next one is the 1ZZ FE engine. Great little engine. However, the early ones, they love to burn oil. That's one of their problems. But if you take care of them very well and you do oil changes on time, they are actually great engines, and they have very little problems. They have a lot to share with the good things of the 2AZ, with the way the cams are set up and the chain is set up. But if you find one that is showing signs of neglect, they love to burn oil when they get neglected. So be careful with these, but if you have a good one, you have a good one. And the last one is, this is going to surprise you, 1GR FE. But wait, didn't we say that's one of the best engines? Well, welcome to the confusion from Toyota. See, the 1GR started out life as this form, and then halfway through it completely changed into the good 1GR. But the original 1GR, the single VVTi one, they have a trend of developing head gasket issues. Data is not clear on exactly why. It's always the same thing, so I feel like it's becoming a pattern with them. In my opinion, if you maintain them well, they will last, especially on the coolant part, but they are starting a little trend with head gaskets, so be careful with these, especially if you're buying them used. And folks, before we end the video, I want to talk about the Hall of Fame of engines. Specific engines that are just engineering and execution masterpieces. Some of them we talked about, but I want to bring them all in one section just to celebrate this era, this time. Some of them are a little newer, some of them are older, but just celebrate these beautiful masterpieces, starting with the one that started Lexus, the 1UZ FE. It's an engine that was certified to go in an airplane. That just should tell you enough about it, although it never was, but it was certified to go there. It is one of the smoothest running engines you'll ever see, possibly period existing. You see the old ones, 20-plus-year-old ones, they run smoother than any new luxury car, no matter how well the engineering is. That's how amazing this engine is. And then the next one, another song to the old days of Toyota reliability and build quality, the 2JZ GTE, and equally the 1JZ GTE. I mean, these engines are so overbuilt. They're unbelievable. The level of attention to detail, to every little detail. That's how good these engines are. They're just amazing. To me, they're the same level as the 1UZ FE. And then the next one, even though it's not fair to put it here, but we must, because it sounds like this. The 1LR GUE, the engine that there's only a few hundred of them, but still, they're the Hall of Famers here. The Lexus LFA engine. Folks, when you look at the technical detail, I've never really been inside one, of course. I've done one oil change on an LFA. When you go into the technical details of that engine, they just went out of this planet in the little stuff. Usually the big stuff, I mean, the engine has pistons, has camshafts and whatnot, but the little stuff is where they went to the next level with this engine. And I wish we're able to get one on a stand. Unfortunately, we can't really do that. And just take it apart and show you the amazing things they did with this engine, the levels they went to do this engine. It's just a masterpiece. And speaking of masterpieces that you can see and get, the 2UR GSE, the 5-liter, beautiful F-car engine. It is such a beautiful masterpiece from everywhere. High performance, reliable, old school, just grunt. That's the word I'm going to use for this engine. It is a good sounding engine. It is reliable. It's very well engineered. And it's just one of the last great V8s to come out of Toyota and Lexus, folks. We had to mention it in the list. And the last two are the 3S GTE. It's the beautiful engine from the old days. Highly tunable. It's a great engine. The cars that are into, like the MR2 in the background, if you see it, or we've talked about the Celica All-Track, a little tough to work on in the cars that came in, but it's a beautiful engine nonetheless, developed by Yamaha. Speaking of Yamaha, let's wrap up the video with the 2ZZ GE. It's a beautiful engine from Yamaha, but there's one thing against it. I will actually say it. You will love this engine in every level until you have to work on it. They're not. The cars that it came in, they're not fun to work on, let's put it this way. But nonetheless, the engine is definitely in the Hall of Fame, because any collaboration between Toyota and Yamaha comes out with some amazing engines. The 1JZ and the 2ZZ. These are some of examples of the Yamaha-Toyota collaboration that come out with just absolute masterpieces. Folks, I hope this video was helpful and informative. I hope you learned something new. If you like it, consider giving it a thumbs up. If you're not a subscriber, consider subscribing to the channel. Check out some other videos. Until the next video, folks, may the Lord bless you and keep you, and you have yourself a wonderful day.